to our webinar on consumer food trends, brought to you by CFAIR. That's the Council on Food, Agricultural, and Resource Economics. My name is Jane Kolodinsky, and I'm the CFAIR Program Chair. It's my pleasure to be moderating today's webinar. Next slide. It's CFAIR's mission to translate high-level research and knowledge to a diverse audience that includes policymakers, elected officials, and federal administrators. When we demonstrate the value of the profession to these groups, the Council increases public appreciation for research, extension, outreach, and academic programs in agricultural and applied economics. Before we get started, I'd like to provide some background on today's topic. This webinar will explore consumer food trends and the forces reshaping today's food economy. Rapid changes in technology, shifting household budgets, persistent inflationary pressures, and evolving tastes and preferences are transforming the choices consumers make every day. Our expert panel will examine how consumers have responded to 4 years of market dynamics, share insights into preferences for cultured meat, and discuss the policy implications emerging from these shifts in demand. This timely conversation will provide valuable perspectives for researchers, policymakers, industry leaders, and anyone interested in the future of food. CFAIR has assembled a panel of experts to discuss their work, starting with Joe Belagtis. Joe is a professor of agricultural economics and director of the Center for Food Demand at Purdue University. His research program investigates the economics of agricultural and food markets, including public policy, industrial organization, and consumer behavior. He has been senior economist at the Council of Economic Advisors, senior Fulbright scholar at the International Rice Research Institute, and is currently co-editor of Applied Economics Policy and Perspective. Sean B. Cash is an economist and chair of the Division of Agriculture, Food, and Environment at the Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy at Tufts University. He conducts research both internationally and domestically on food, nutrition, agriculture, and the environment. He focuses on how food, nutrition, and environmental policies affect food consumption and choice, with specific interest in consumer interest in environmental and nutritional attributes of food, novel food products, and economic aspects of the food-environment interface. Dr. Vicentina Caputo is an agricultural and food economist and professor and Homer Nolan Endowed Chair in Consumer and Food Economics in the Department of Agricultural, Food, and Resource Economics at Michigan State University. That's MSU. She directs the Food Choice and Policy Lab, where she partners with industry leaders and policymakers to generate evidence-based insights on emerging market trends, consumer decision-making, and food policy design, translating research into strategic action for industry innovation and policy reform. Before I hand things over to our panelists, I'd like to remind you that you can submit questions for the speaker in the chat box at any time. We'll hold a question and answer session at the end of the presentation where our panelists will address your questions. Now I'll hand the webinar over to Joseph, who'll start us off. Welcome, Joseph.
Thank you very much, Jane. Thank you to CFAIR for organizing, and to Jane in particular for inviting me into this session. Also for letting me go first, so I don't have to follow the tough acts of Sean and Vicentina. I wanted to set the table by talking about set the table for a discussion on food trends or consumer food trends by talking about sort of the broad contours of what we ag economists know about consumer behavior in food space. And I want to do so by leaning on empirical insights that my colleagues and I at the Center for Food Demand have gathered based on 4 years of a running survey of American food consumers. Next slide, please. So that survey is called the Consumer Food Insights Survey. It's a monthly online survey of about 1,200 American adults, where we ask consumers about their perceptions and their experience and behavior in food markets. The survey sample is managed by a market research company, Dynata. It's a quota-based sample where we target key demographics and we weight the sample to match U.S. Census demographic figures and get something like U.S. representative behaviors and perceptions for American consumers. Importantly, we've been conducting the survey since January 2022, so more than 4 years now of survey data. We put together a report every month. If you really strain your eyes, you can see there on the right of my slide our very first report, and if you really squint, you can see the author of that report was Jason Lusk with our colleague Sam Polson. Jason. The survey was Jason's brainchild, and in some ways we're just tweaking around the edges of his original idea. So I want to use this survey to sort of focus in on four key takeaways or lessons that we're drawing from the survey. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the first is that American food values are really stable. So what do I mean by values? We ask consumers what food attributes are important to them when they go to the grocery store or when they go out to eat. And we do so in a way that allows us to quantify. So we give them a set of food attributes, which you see here: taste, affordability, nutrition, and so on. And we give them a budget of 100 points, and we say, assign these 100 points across these various attributes in order of importance to you. So more points means more important. And so what do we learn, right? This is from our November 2025 survey, but it doesn't change very much. But first and foremost, consumers value taste. So food needs to be tasty to us. Not far behind taste is affordability and availability. Nutrition is a somewhat distant third, and way down the line, but not zero. So important, but not nearly as important as taste and affordability, are things like environmental impact or how workers are treated in the food system. Right. Next slide, please. And this data is important because food values affect choices that they make. Right. So, for example, on the panel to the right of this slide, we ask consumers, one, do you support regenerative agriculture? And almost everybody says yes. 80% of households or American adults say yes. But then we ask, who do you think should pay for regenerative agricultural methods? Right. And almost nobody, 6% of consumers say I should pay. Right. They think the government should pay, so maybe indirectly they're willing to pay, or they think the food companies should pay or farmers should pay, right? So the fact that regenerative agriculture is important, but it's not important enough for consumers to pay out of pocket on average, ties our food values to are willing to adopt technological change, for example, or are willingness to pay for reduced environmental consequences of our food choices. Next slide, please. The second lesson I want to highlight from our survey is that food insecurity in the United States remains a persistent challenge. We know that by collecting in our own survey using the USDA's short form insecurity module to measure food insecurity on a monthly basis, right? And that's important because there's uncertainty about the federal government's interest in continuing to collect this data. But also the frequency with which we measure is important. So it allows us, we're measuring on a monthly basis, it allows us, for example, to look at the impacts, measure the impacts of the disruptions last fall to SNAP funding, right? And what we saw was a spike, a statistically significant increase in food insecurity last November. It also allows us to give us real-time estimates of food insecurity. So while just a couple months ago, USDA released its estimate of food insecurity in 2024, we have food insecurity rates estimated for January 2026, right? So we're able to keep our finger on the pulse in a little more timely fashion. Next slide, please. The third takeaway from our survey is, and this is not a surprise necessarily, is that we don't eat very well. We don't eat very healthfully. We use a survey instrument developed by Mayo Clinic to estimate HEI, estimate diet quality in the United States. And this is average diet quality in the United States since we began collecting the data 2 years ago. 61 is the threshold for unhealthy. And so on average, adult American diet quality is just barely above healthy. Just barely above unhealthy. Next slide, please. We could also look at the distribution of diet quality, and here I'm interacting that diet quality measure with food insecurity and showing you the empirical distribution. What does the population of diet quality look like across all consumers that are either food secure or food insecure, right? And so we could see, for example, that food insecure households have lower diet quality on average, and a larger share of the population of the food insecure is eating an unhealthy diet, right? Next slide, please. And then the last takeaway I want to highlight is that most Americans, and this is important, I think, are happy with their diets. We ask consumers about their satisfaction in the food space, and we just directly ask them, you know, taking your economic situation and the foods available to you, are you not very happy, not at all happy, rather happy, or very happy with your diet? And 85% of Americans tell us they're happy with their diets, and that's persistent over the lifetime of this survey, even in 2022 or 2023, when we had food inflation of about 11%, right? And core inflation also historically high, right? And I think that two things from this, I take away two things from this. One is that our food system is remarkably resilient to challenges. And two, for those of us who are looking to affect change in what we eat, either to improve nutrition or improve environmental outcomes associated with our food system, to do so, we have to convince 85% of Americans who are happy with their diet to change what they eat, right? And so that's a challenge that food technologists, that environmentalists, that food security advocates need to address as in their own work. Let me go forward. Next slide, please. Let me conclude just by thanking or recognizing lots of co-authors or colleagues who collaborate with me on this project. Jason Lusk, I mentioned, Sam Polson, Eli Bryant, Ahmad Wadat, and Caitlin Hubble, all collaborating with me. And let me say, if you're interested in our research, more details, if you're interested in collaboration, I'm pretty easy to find on the internet. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you, Joseph. Now that we have that overview of consumer food trends, we're going to turn it over to Sean, who's going to look at food and technology. Welcome, Sean.
Thank you very much, Jane, and thank you everyone for having me here today. As Jane mentioned, I'm Sean Cash, and I'm an agricultural and food economist at the Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy, where I chair our Division of Agriculture, Food, and Environment. Today, I'm talking about the rapidly evolving, but still very much nascent market for cultivated meat, also known as lab-grown meat. And I want to talk about how consumers are responding and may be expected to respond as we just now see the first products start to become available in very limited ways on the market. Given the limited time I have available right now, I won't be providing detailed results from our many completed and ongoing studies on these topics, but instead we'll just give a fast overview. I invite you to reach out to me later for details if you're interested. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. I've been interested in this space for a while, and I've been working on it actively for the past, back one slide, please. And I've been working on it actively for the past 4.5 years now with support from grants from the United States Department of Agriculture's National Institute of Food and Agriculture. USDA support established a National Institute for Cellular Agriculture as part of the Tufts University Center for Cellular Agriculture, or TUCA, in 2022. TUCA is the country's largest academic center focused on cellular agriculture. And by cellular agriculture, I mean the cultivation of agricultural commodities from cells rather than from whole animals. This includes the production of animal agriculture products through cell culture, tissue engineering, and related biotechnologies. This can include non-food products such as leather, as well as food products normally produced from plants, such as coffee or cocoa. Next slide, please. But of course, what has grabbed the most attention has been the use of these technologies to produce food normally produced through conventional animal agriculture, such as meat, dairy, and eggs. A sample of animal cells are collected and cultivated in growth media inside of bioreactors. These bioreactors look quite a bit like the brewery fermentation tanks you might see if you visit your local small beer brewery. The cells are nourished with a growth medium inside of these bioreactors for a matter of several weeks until they are ready to be harvested and processed into cultivated meat products. These processes and products have attracted attention because of the potential for improved animal welfare, lower environmental impact of food production, as well as the potential to customize products that otherwise might not exist, such as enhanced nutritional profiles or even producing food from endangered species. And yes, all of these hopes are still very much active debates of both scientific and ethical issues. Next slide, please. While the idea of cell-cultivated meat has existed in some form for at least a century, and production at scale of cultivated cells for biopharmaceutical purposes has been commercialized since the 1970s, the practical development of cell-cultivated meat has a much shorter history. Mark Post debuted the first cultivated meat burger on television in 2013. This was funded by Sergey Brin of Google fame, and it cost over $300,000 for just that one hamburger. In the past 10 years, we've seen the launch of cultivated meat companies, and the first approval of a product for sale occurred in Singapore in 2020. It was just in 2022 that the US Food and Drug Administration approved the idea of meat products for human consumption, cultivated meat products for human consumption, and the following year in 2023, 2 cultivated chicken products received final approval for sale and were sold just a handful of times in 2 US restaurants, one in Washington, D.C. and one in California. This past year has seen some more, but still limited restaurant launches, and just a few months ago, a company called Mission Barns sold the first packages of a cultivated meat product, a meatball that combines cell-cultivated pork fat with plant-based proteins, at a single supermarket in California's East Bay. Note that these sales were very limited. All of the packages sold out in a short period of time on just one day. Next slide, please. Worldwide, only a few companies and products have been approved, with 5 products being approved for sale in the United States as of today. Other approvals have taken place in Singapore, Israel, Australia, and New Zealand, and in the UK just for pet food so far. Despite some rumors going around on social media, no, nobody in the US or anywhere else has been tricked into buying cell-cultivated meat. These products are barely available, are clearly labeled and marketed as being produced from a cell cultivation process, and are still more expensive to make than conventional counterparts. At least right now, no one can afford to start sneaking lab-grown meat into your fast food restaurants or supermarket meat counters. Current consumer activity in actually purchasing this product is very much limited by availability and has been driven by those shoppers with an active curiosity in trying these products. Next slide, please. One of the studies from my research group, now published in the journal Future Foods, looked at media reporting of these first 2 sale approvals of cell-cultivated chicken in 2023. Specifically, we looked at reporting in major US news outlets to see if the types of language being used to describe the very first parts of this transition of these products from the research bench to consumers' mouths were in line with our expectations of how this reporting might take place. Next slide, please. Here's a very fast overview of some of the major themes we saw in that reporting. Almost all of the news stories included discussion of the realness of meat produced through cellular agriculture. Many of these studies also mentioned environmental implications of cultivated meat production, as well as touched on the politics of cultivated meat. More on that in a moment. Other key topics of consideration included the potential benefits of cultivated meat, the taste experience, consumers' concerns about these products, and the technical feasibility of production at scale. Next slide, please. There's also been active work on trying to gauge consumer acceptance of cultivated meat at a broader scale, both by market research firms and also by academic researchers, including myself and my co-presenters today. I know that Joe's Center has conducted surveys on this topic, and Vincenzina has been involved in experiments on consumer interest in lab-grown meat. This work has been going on for about a decade now, but as these products have not been available for most of that time, and even today are not accessible for the vast majority of consumers, these studies have been based on people's self-reported interest, what economists call stated preference. Consistent themes in most of these studies is that the number of people who find the idea of these products to be appealing is actually still a minority. A large enough group that perhaps it could support a viable commercial industry, but still less than half, even when broken down by age, income, education, ethnicity, or any other demographic or attitudinal measures you might imagine. Similarly, studies of willingness to pay conducted by myself and others could pretty consistently find that most consumers are only likely to want to purchase these products if they're actually cheaper than conventional products, which is definitely not currently the case. And it's just a minority of shoppers who state that they might be interested to pay a premium for lab-grown meats. Now, such studies are interesting, and they can also be useful to learn more about what kinds of people might be more interested in these products, or how different types of messaging, marketing, and labeling might influence interest in these products. But of course, there are major limitations to stated preference exercises. In particular, they're disconnected from actual consumer experience of the products. Even the most avid supporter of the idea of cultivated meat is unlikely to repeatedly purchase a product if they don't like the taste, and even some of the most skeptical consumers might be swayed if they find something to be delicious. Moreover, stated preference exercises tell us nothing about how consumer interest might and will evolve as such products go from being novel and hard to find to perhaps more ubiquitous in stores and restaurants. Next slide, please. Despite the fact that almost no one can find these products to buy, 7 states have actually enacted various bans on the manufacture, sale, and/or distribution of cultivated meat. Despite the framing by supporters of these bans as being focused on protecting animal agriculture, the real issue seems to be one of identity-driven politics around debates of what is real meat or real food. And the formal statements of many livestock producer organizations have expressed concerns about these bans, not support for them, and instead have been focused on wanting clear guidelines on nomenclature, clearly wanting things to be marked as lab-grown, for example. Next slide. So as a research question, part of our team's work, and this is in collaboration with some folks at Purdue University as well, has been to look at the social media buzz that's taken place on Twitter, Instagram, and other platforms around the debates and reporting over these bans. In the interest of time, I won't dive into the results much, but next slide, please. But key themes that emerge here include debates over the perceived benefits again, such as feeding a growing population or potential environmental benefits, versus concerns over the fakeness of such things, or even worries that cell cultivation processes somehow mimic the growth of cancer cells, which has led to unsubstantiated concerns about carcinogenicity of cultivated meat products. Next slide, please. Okay, but people are actually able to taste this now. So what are we learning from that? Well, the first public tasting of cultivated chicken, where anyone who showed up could sample the products, actually occurred in Miami in June 2024, just a few days before the Florida state ban went into effect. This event, hosted by Upside Foods, one of the approved manufacturers of cell-cultivated chicken in the United States, was called the Freedom of Food pop-up event. Members of our team were there to interview participants, and their impressions of both the chicken and the bans are reported in an article we published last year in the journal NPJ Science of Food. Most of the participants actually enjoyed tasting the product, although many were not sure about their interest in repeat consumption. And there was strong opposition to the state ban among practically all participants at the event. Next slide, please. Earlier, I mentioned that Mission Barnes has sold some of its product in a grocery store in California. They've actually hosted 3 open tasting events of their products at that same grocery store, and we surveyed participants at all 3 of those tastings. The final one was actually just 6 days ago, and we're just crunching the data now. So I'll have numbers from the general public tasting to share with you very soon. And while I can't tell you details, I can share that again here, many of the participants were actually very impressed with the meat products they tasted. These again consist of cultivated pork fat combined with plant-based proteins. We also have other studies ongoing right now where we are doing our own tastings of some of the approved products and some comparison tasting as well that we'll be conducting in the coming months. Next slide, please. I'd just like to wrap up by acknowledging my many co-authors on these products, which I did not have time to name all of them today, as well as the funding, primary funding coming from USDA's Agriculture and Food Research Initiative, the Sustainable Agriculture Systems grant that helped launch our center, as well as some other grants we've received. Thank you all. I look forward to questions later.
Thank you, Dr. Cash. And you also highlighted how important it is for federal dollars to help with research such as yours. Next, we're going to be turning to Dr. Caputo. Welcome.
Hello, Jane. Thank you for the invitation. Thanks, everyone, for taking the time to attend this webinar. I will move a little bit away from what people do and what they buy when it comes with food choices, and I will now focus more on what consumers see when they go to the supermarket or to restaurants to buy their food. In other words, I will focus the attention to food environments and what changes in food environments would imply for industry operation and policy moving forward. I would like to acknowledge that part of this work has been supported by the USDA NIFA and the Nowlin Chair here at MSU. Please go to the next slide. So Joe, in his first presentation, said at some point that US consumers are satisfied with their diets in general, and that this trend is quite consistent over time, has pointed out by the results of his monthly survey at Purdue. But when we look at how these diets translate in terms of chronic diseases, we know from existing data that obesity is still a persistent challenge in the US, as well as in other HWO countries, and that in many instances, this comes with additional health-related diseases and public cost. And this is particularly relevant not only for the general population, but especially for low-income consumers. So to the next slide, what I would like to point out here is that policymakers have done a lot in the past years, including the government, to address this challenge. And those tools have included dietary guidelines, but also policy at different levels, including educational policy, such as, for example, nutritional labeling programs or health claim-related programs. But also initiatives from the industry with emerging labeling that companies will use to highlight the health and nutritional aspects of food products. Those tools have also included fiscal policies. One of the most known policy within the food space is soda tax. So what we do as applied economists is to assist policymakers to understand how this policy works. And what we found out when looking at the overall impact of those policies over time is that in many instances, individuals will reduce consumption of unhealthy food choices, although this behavior is mixed and temporary. But also what we found out here is that there are a lot of unintended consequences. So for example, a soda tax will reduce the consumption of soda over time, but at the same time increase the consumption of other unhealthy food options, for example, calorie-dense option. Now, one of the main questions here is that when we do those studies, we use existing data, or we use data that we as applied economists can create using experimental frameworks. But what we do is we assume that food environments, meaning that what people see when they go to the grocery stores or when they go to the restaurant, are neutral. They will not affect what people will purchase and consume overall. To the next slide. But the reality is that what people buy is not only driven by their own preferences, let's say prices or preferences for certain attributes. Again, going back to Joe's presentation, people like taste or other quality claims when they buy food products. But what people buy is also determined by supply forces. So for example, what products are available in the supermarket when I go there? What are the prices of those products and how those products are presented to consumers. And so, in other words, the point I would like to make here is that when we look at the demand side and what people do and consumer trends, we need to look at what they like and what they dislike, but also to look at what people see when they go and buy their food. To the next slide. So what I did here was, okay, let's now see whether there are existing data that we can use to inform this policy debate. And what I did was to look at food delivery or digital marketplaces, which is pretty big in the US, but also in other emerging economies, and at food away from home, which overall has been understudied, although in the US represents almost more than the half of the food expenditure of US consumers. And what I did, I used new data that we call in academia web scrape data, where I go, I partnered with the company, and what we did is we went online and looked at all the different menus that are available to consumers when they order food for delivery in popular apps such as Uber Eats or DoorDash. To the next slide. So here what I will present are three main findings that obviously have important policy implications, especially within these new discussions about healthy food choices in the US. The first element is what is available to consumers in terms of what type of retailers are available. The second point I would like to make is how the food menus people see when they buy food online align with past and current dietary guidelines. And the last one is whether those menus are healthy in terms of calorie intakes and other micronutrients. And I would like to make this point given the big discussion about nutrients and micronutrients intakes in the new dietary guideline. Obviously, I will also point some affordability issue looking at the data we have collected so far. Please, to the next slide. So starting from the food environment, so what is out there in terms of restaurants, we have distinguished between fast food restaurants and regular restaurants, as you can see from this picture, panel A and panel B. And what we found out is that fast food restaurants dominate overall, and specifically in places where income is relatively low, and those places that are generally classified as to be non-metropolitan areas, specifically rural areas. This obviously raises a lot of questions regarding food deserts and whether low-income communities or rural communities receive the same type of food other consumers receive when living in more metropolitan areas. To the next slide. The second point I would like to make is what type of food is available to consumers in terms of food categories that is often used in dietary guidelines, including My Plate, which was the previous one, but also the new one that has been recently introduced by the current administration. What we found out here is that the food environments are in many instances protein dense and meat forward, with a representation of fruits and veggies, which is in the case of veggies below 20% and in the case of fruits are below 3%. And this is regardless of the type of restaurants, meaning that the same trend is characterizing both fast food restaurants and regular restaurants. To the next slide. To look further into this point, the next slide will look at what type of overall these food environments, these restaurants will offer to individuals the calories or calorie-dense products or products with other macro and macronutrients. And we found out that in all the menu we have evaluated, on average, dishes are above the recommended calorie intakes, and they are lower in good nutrients, such as, for example, potassium, and high in unhealthy or what is considered unhealthy nutrients, such as saturated fat, cholesterol, and in some instances also protein, especially the ones from highly processed food. To the next slide. Looking not only at nutrition and product composition, we now then took a step forward and wanted to look about affordability. So what are the items that are most affordable to consumers to solve the link between food insecurity and obesity? And what we found out is that there is just a very small share, below 50%. Those are some representative states in this panel A picture that are affordable to consumers, especially for low-income consumers. And in this case, we are looking at people that receive SNAP benefits. Obviously, this is useful, especially in terms of informing the current debate about the new regulations around the SNAP program in the nation. And when we look at where the majority of food is affordable, obviously fast food becomes the most prominent place, and this is regardless of the state under consideration. To the next slide. Obviously, this opens a big discussion about what should we do to solve these food system challenges. While in the past there's been work done on the supply side in isolation or on the demand side in isolation, there is a need for a more systemic approach. For example, on the supply side, we need to do more work and we need more resources to look at what are the incentives for the industry to understand what are the costs implied by reformulation of food items, especially the ones that include additives and ultra-processed food that has been shown to be extremely unhealthy in terms of obesity, contribution to obesity rates. And obviously, we need some sort of data or even collaboration between policymakers and industry to make this happen, because while we can look at the consumer side and at the demand side of what people buy, we don't have enough data on the industry side to understand how the industry sees those policies, how the industry adjusts to new policies, and what can be done to create the good incentives for them to change their production systems where needed. I think I can go to the last slide, and thank you all for your attention. I think you can go to the last one. The last one, the thank you, yes. I would like to thank you, all my team, for this work, and again to the USDA and IFA for the contribution and the support to do this research. Thank you.